It's an honor to be able to read this eulogy of my rabbi's father, written by Rabbi Sam Cohon. Kindness is a quality that our world undervalues and perhaps always has. While most of our attention is typically paid to those among us who trumpet their own importance, the rare people who are genuinely kind, who have an innate sweetness of character and personality, and a generosity of spirit, are often taken for granted. Yet the truth is that kindness is a remarkable and beautiful gift that brings joy and ease into the lives that are too often devoid of both. The Hebrew words for kindness are best translated as chen v'chesed, two words that have one meaning and are associated with divine favor. They might literally be translated as grace and favor, but are really together, they mean kindness and are the qualities of God's generosity that we seek. Kindness is not a weakness. Some of the kindest people in the world are also very strong, sure of their own capacities and values. It is this that allows them to demonstrate respect for all human beings, to express the godlike ability to show others the proper treatment due to everyone created b'tselem Elohim in the divine image, which of course is all of us. Irwin Steinberg was no pushover. He was a strong, capable man and a physician who lived an adventurous, peripatetic life of accomplishment. But he was also an innately kind person who expressed that kindness in the way he treated everyone of every age. He was very much loved and will be much missed. Irwin was born October 19th, 1928, in Freehold, New Jersey. He immigrated to Brazil when he was 10 years old, and therein lies a tale. Irwin's dad, Mayor Leib Steinberg, was originally a peddler in America, having moved here from pre-state Palestine. His mother, Rose, was from the Russian Empire, a Litvak. Irwin also had an older brother, Herbie, nearly a decade older, in New Jersey. Much of the Steinberg side of the family, though, was living in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Some arrived there directly from the pre-state Palestine, and some fled Europe prior to World War II. They went to Brazil because they were refused entrance into the United States. The Steinbergs in Brazil were doing very well. Meanwhile, in the 30s, it was the Depression era in America. So the Brazilian family encouraged Irwin's dad, Meyer Leib, to join them in Rio. Irwin's father went first to Brazil, but his mother, Rose, was the daughter of the rabbi in Freehold, and she didn't want to leave. She had finally learned English, and now she also had to learn Portuguese and French. But in 1939, Rose and the boys, Herbie and Irwin, finally took a ship down to South America, hugging the coast to avoid Nazi U-boats until they reached Brazil. Irwin's family was quite observant and kept kosher in Brazil. In Rio, Irwin's father worked for his brother's clothing store until he could open his own women's boutique. Irwin had to learn Portuguese, which he did rapidly, mostly learning it on the street. They lived in Ipanema, near the beach in Rio. Being just 10 years old, Irwin quickly adapted to life in Brazil. He went through school in Rio, stayed in Brazil until 1957, graduated from medical school. He didn't feel adequately trained, so he took a residency at a postdoc year at NYU, did his medical internship at Albany State, and a residency in Bellevue for 5 years, 3 years of general surgery, 2 years of orthopedics. He married in 1959. Pat met Irwin in 1961. She was the orthopedic nurse for 5 doctors, and he was one of them. Irwin was married at the time with 3 daughters, Julie, born in 61, Kara in 1963, and Lisa in 1967. The family lived in Long Island and then Elmsburg, New York. They moved a few times. Eventually, Irwin's first marriage ended in divorce. Pat, who was working for Irwin, then gave notice because she needed some familial assistance, as she was divorced and raising her own 4 children, Ellen, Donnie, Richard, and Carol Ann. Pat had a family in Louisiana, and they invited her to go to live there. Unexpectedly, Irwin said to her, "Wait for me." They had never had any romantic involvement until then, although she knew she loved him. But he followed her to Louisiana. Irwin couldn't stay in Louisiana, as he couldn't handle the humid environment and had terrible asthma there. So they drove west and arrived in Tucson, Arizona. Providentially, there were big celebrations when they arrived because the University of Arizona baseball team was going to the College Baseball World Series. Pat said, "I think we should stay here." So they did. But Irwin was distraught about missing his daughters and decided to go back to Brazil to be with family for a while. Pat stayed in Tucson. Pat, who had gotten a job working for 2 doctors at Tucson Medical Center as a nurse, borrowed a car, picked Irwin up at the airport, where he said, "Yes, we should get married." Irwin married Pat in December 1970 in Yuma, Arizona. They then got married again by Rabbi Joe Wiesenbaum in Tucson, and finally, about a decade later, had a wedding through Chabad. Apparently, they liked having weddings. When Pat got pregnant with Paul, born in 1973, Irwin said, "If we're going to have a child, I want him to be Jewish." So Pat went to Rabbi Wiesenbaum and converted to Judaism after studying diligently. Irwin wanted Paul to learn about his Jewish heritage and would eventually send him to Hebrew school and to Chabad Lubavitcher Day School. In Tucson, Irwin and Pat opened up their own medical office on 2nd Street, but moved in 1977 to Plainview in West Texas for a year. When they had to deal with extreme anti-Semitism there, they moved to Newport Beach, California in 1978, where Irwin got a job. They lived in California for about 8 years, moving back to Tucson in 1986 before Paul had his bar mitzvah at Anshe Israel with Rabbi Arthur Oleski. When they moved back to Tucson in 1986, Irwin had thought he could retire, but soon realized he couldn't really retire. Rather than restarting in Tucson, he kept his California connections and flew back and forth weekly as a medical consultant. The truth is that he never really wanted to retire. Even in his 90s, when his memory started to go, he used to say to Pat, "Don't I have patients to see today?" He used to say to his daughter, "Never retire, never quit." Kara had a vivid memory of when she was 18 years old at the grocery store ordering some deli meats. Irwin had said something uncomplimentary about the woman behind the counter. It stuck as a memory for her because it was the only negative thing he ever said that she had heard, because he was invariably a kind man. Ellen said, whenever he saw any of us and said goodbye, he would say, "Be good." He was always positive, loving, supportive. He always related to people no matter how great the age difference, and he was invariably kind and interested in everyone. Paul says he had a lot of energy. He was physically strong, physically active. He would spend hours in the office at home doing the mail or working in the yard or fixing something in the house or doing dishes. Good husband. He didn't sit still. He couldn't. Irwin also loved sports. He played basketball and volleyball as a teenager. Paul would urge him into playing sports with him as a kid, pitching baseball to him, shooting baskets. Lisa remembered In his 80s, he got down on his hands and knees and clear-coated all the slates in the patio. Paul said, my dad loved having people over, meeting new people, sitting and listening to people. A true people person, he really listened. Kara said, he was always in the moment, listening to you, clearly involved in what you were saying and how your life was going. Paul said he was a man's man, but he had a sensitive side. He cried in movies, didn't watch violence on TV, and didn't approve of cursing in movies. Ellen said he would only say people who aren't smart. Only people who aren't smart use 4-letter words. Kira recalled he gave me the best parental advice ever. He said, you think your kids need all kinds of things, but what they really need is to know that you always love them and support them and believe in them. Carol Ann once took baby chicks home because she learned that no one wanted them. He heard the cheeping from her drawer and found them and said, what is this? What are they doing here? But soon he was holding them and feeding them with an eyedropper. That was Irwin. Paul noted he wasn't a pushover. He could get angry. If he didn't feel he was getting what he paid for, he would tell you. Irwin understood from personal experience that no one was going to give you anything in life. He knew you had to stand on your own 2 feet and figure it out. He was very independent that way. And Paul added, my dad really loved my mom, and he was so proud of her spiritual explorations. And he would brag about her when she would teach groups of women about Jewish spirituality in their home. Shira, his daughter-in-law, said, Paul and I got married Hanukkah 2022, and I paid close attention to Irwin the last couple of years, and I saw how devoted and loving he was to Pat. Once she was wiping down the dishes and she asked him, do you want to help and dry the dishes? To which he said, I'll do anything for you. Also, once Pat was helping Irwin put his hearing aids, and she said, you forgot to put these in your ears. To which he looked up tenderly and said, you forgot that I love you. This Shabbat in synagogue, we will focus on the story of Jacob in the Torah portion Vayetze. So will we. Jacob was a great wanderer, traveling from Canaan to Haran and then back, fathering our nation of Israel, having adventures everywhere he journeyed. Throughout those travels, Jacob was mystically reassured to know that God was always with him and would ultimately bring him home to the promised land. Erwin Steinberg, who traveled far along his road of life, creating a family of dedication and love and helping so many patients over his long career, has come now to his own promised land. May the memory of this profoundly kind man and of his many accomplishments shine brightly for his loving family and friends. Lech l'shalom, Irwin. Go now in peace.